Campbell Todd, Nicholas Shaw, Juliana Reeves, and Sean Sexton. So in 2013, there was an investigation of Wells Fargo, which showed that managers were pushing really aggressive and very hard to reach, almost impossible sales goals. And this led to the employees creating a lot of accounts without customers' consent, and also using really perverse incentives like the employees would get really good, a lot of incentives for opening these accounts and meeting these impossible goals. One of the biggest things that was emphasized by the CEO at that time, who was Richard Kovacevic, was cross-selling, which basically meant that they would be encouraged to sell customers multiple products at the same time. And something that he said a lot was going for great, which is kind of a play on words, because the 8 there stands for 8 different products, which are mortgages, online bank accounts, credit and debit cards, savings accounts, and etc. Things that they sell in banks. Wells Fargo is generally historically known as the best cost seller, and they kind of exploited this to open all these fake bank accounts. During their scandal, they opened up to 1.5 million checking accounts and 500,000 credit cards without the consent of their customers. In 2012, they also paid $5.83 billion due to the mortgage lending practices, which led to the 2008 financial crisis. 5 other large banks also paid this amount of money, and it totaled up to about $26 billion. And moving on, my partner Campbell is going to talk about the fraud and also the stakeholders.
So I'm going to be talking about what actually was the fraud that went on. So a lot of this was employees' wrongdoing and managers' wrongdoing. So employees would use their own contact information to fill out account information for their customers in order to prevent them from getting notifications regarding their account. They would also open fraudulent checkings and savings account to move money out of legitimate accounts. This would give them the illusion that they had more accounts opened and that they were active accounts. They would also set the client's PIN to 00, like something generic like 0000. That way they would always know what the customer's PIN was. That way they didn't need to ask them for their PIN and for permission to open anything up. This resulted in a total of 3.5 million fake accounts being created. And they faced a large amount of fines. There was also a lot of harm caused to customers. About 85,000 of the accounts that were opened incurred fees for not having enough money, for not doing enough transactions, which totaled up to $2 million. Some of these people who were fined were into dire financial straits. It also hurt their credit scores because they were delinquent on their payments because they had accounts that they weren't aware of. Next slide. John Stump was one of the, while he didn't directly emphasize the need to do these fake accounts, he made the incentives in such a way where you needed to open enough amount of accounts to keep your position. I'll be passing it off to Sean to talk about causation and liability.
Okay. So the direct cause of this fraud was the environment that the upper level managers set up in order to push these sales numbers that they wanted. So these, the incentives being directly tied towards sales, and the fact that if you didn't meet these, there was a chance that you wouldn't keep your job. This directly led to the fraud and this like pressure cooker like environment that these sales employees were working under. And the civil liability here is that Wells Fargo is criminally liable for committing the fraud and opening these accounts under the customer's names without their permission. And if Wells Fargo failed to uphold their fiduciary duty to its clients, which is their fiduciary duty to their clients. And in the Security and Exchange Commission Act, Rule 10B states the duty to not engage in any material misrepresentation or omission, and duty to disclose information, which they directly violated in this fraud. Moving along now to the stakeholders of the case.
Now that we're hopping into the CIMAC part of this project, I'm going to be going over 6 major stakeholders that this fraud had to deal with. So first of all, the corporate officers, and specifically John Stahl. He claimed he had no idea what was going on, when in reality his incentives were boosted by the fact that these frauds were being committed. As a result of the fraud, he was basically forced to resign and was barred from entering the financial sector for life. Bank tellers, the lower level employees that were actually committing the frauds, lost their jobs from doing it. They damaged their reputation, and they now live with the guilt from harming thousands of individuals and the affected family members from the problems that this fraud had created. Regional and district managers are also stakeholders. They got large bonuses for meeting the sales quotas, but this came at a cost. Many of them lost their jobs for incentivizing employees to commit the fraud. Account holders were innocent bystanders that were harmed. They had their accounts created on their behalf without their permission, which incurred fees and hurt their credit scores, which can be detrimental to their future. The stockholders were also major stakeholders. I included a picture in the bottom right-hand corner of the graph to show the stock price decline after these frauds were announced. They didn't have the idea that these accounts were fake, so the fake accounts gave them the false initiative or false hope that they were getting more accounts, therefore increasing their stock value, when in reality these were just bogus accounts that were not valuable. And also the banking industry was another stakeholder, because this damaged the banking industry's perception and the trust held among banks. I'll be passing it off to Nick to talk about the systemic, corporate, and individual issues.
Thank you, Campbell. So first, we're going to talk about the systemic issues with Wells Fargo. The corrupt culture of the company had been in place for decades, actually. Wells Fargo continued to promote new CEOs and COOs from within after each scandal. So systemically, the culture couldn't be fixed when you're hiring someone from the inside who was a part of the organization when all these things were going on. Fraud was actually being committed across the nation simultaneously at hundreds of different banks. Another systemic issue stems from Wells Fargo being a publicly traded company, and Wells Fargo cared more about appeasing its shareholders than the effect it would have on the actual individual consumer. Next, I'm going to talk about the corporate issues with Wells Fargo. The fraudulent activities at Wells Fargo, they stemmed from the top of the organization. The corporate executives implemented a plan to push for cross-selling to its retail consumers. This goal was distributed down to the district management, who began pushing cross-selling. They were pushing for retail bankers to open as many bank accounts as possible for each individual customer. The result of this would obviously boost the earning reports on the stock and increase the stock price. Verbal threats were actually made by management across different branches to the bank tellers that if their sales goals were not met, they could face termination. Next, I'm going to talk about the individual issues at Wells Fargo. John Stumpf, we all know who he is by now. He was the CEO from 2007 to 2016. He actually still denies that the corporate executives had anything to do with the fraudulent accounts being created, which is ridiculous. That's obviously neglect, and he was charged and faced with a heavy fine. Carrie Tolsett, she was the head of the retail bank from 2005 to 2016. She is the main person who publicly endorsed the cross-selling metric. and she signed misleading sub certifications pertaining to the accuracy of the bank's public disclosures. Tim Sloan was the CEO for a brief period from 2016 to 2019. Sloan was the COO in 2015, which means he was aware of all the fraud that was going on. And he was actually promoted to the COO after Stump sat down. And while he was CEO, the bank was in another scandal involved charging extra for mortgages and auto loans. Another individual, I don't have the names, obviously, but it's over 5,000 employees were fired over creating fraudulent accounts, and millions of customers were affected by these actions. Now I'm going to pass it over to Juliana to explain the cost benefit model.
Hi, I'm Juliana, and I'll be going over the models today. So for the cost benefit model, I'm going to start off with benefits because it's a little bit shorter. So from Wells Fargo's perspective, the main benefit they were getting out of committing a fraud was their short-run profits for the company, the stockholders, and the employees. And specifically for the employees, they had their bonuses tied to opening the account. So that's the benefits they saw. But the costs were much greater in this circumstance. So Wells Fargo incurred several costs from refunds and lawsuits. This included $6.1 million in customer refunds due to inappropriate fees and charges, $142 million in customer compensation due to a class action suit, $480 million settlement for a shareholder class action suit, and $575 million for a 50-state attorney general settlement for the combination of opening unauthorized accounts and for charging for unnecessary auto insurance and mortgage fees, which was like the more recent fraud. So ultimately, another cost was this damaged the reputation of Wells Fargo, and ultimately people lost faith in the banking system because of this fraud. And they didn't trust that their money was being protected in the banking system. So next I'll cover the fundamental human rights. So the first right that was violated was the stockholders and the customer's right not to be defrauded. So by opening these accounts, Wells Fargo artificially inflated their market value and their stock price, so which defrauded the stockholders, and through opening the fake accounts in the customers' names, this defrauded the customers. Second, we have the customer's right to privacy was violated. So employees would take advantage of customers' trust and misuse customer personal information like account passwords and PINs to create new accounts and enroll customers in miscellaneous services, which is wrong. And finally, Wells Fargo violated the customer's right to knowledge by not disclosing what was going on with their customers' accounts and where their money was going. And they just did this to keep the fraud underneath the rug, which was ultimately wrong. So finally, I'll go over the universalizing and reversibility. So from a universalizing perspective, so what would the world look like if everyone committed fraud? So specifically for the banking industry, if everyone committed fraud, no one would trust the banking industry and they wouldn't put their money in banks, which would ultimately hurt customers and bankers alike. So this is not a world where anyone would want to live in. So and then finally, we have our reversibility. So would Stump like being defrauded out of millions of dollars? And I could pretty confidently say that he wouldn't. Furthermore, how would Stump feel if his bank was creating accounts and moving his money around without his knowledge or permission, which I'm pretty sure he would not find very fun. So finally, we'll go over the optimization versus maximizing.
Wells Fargo was engaging in short-term maximum profit analysis during this period. Managers pushed heavily on creating profits and growth in the short term, while they jeopardized Wells Fargo's long-term profits and reputation. This case illustrates a complete failure of leadership at multiple levels within the bank. Nick Hanna, U.S. Attorney General, U.S. Attorney for Central District of California, said in a statement, Wells Fargo traded its hard-earned reputation for short-term profits and harmed untold numbers of customers along the way. So their management's heavy emphasis on these weekly quotas created a pressure cooker sales environment and led to this heavy fraud. And although these daily quotas did lead to more open accounts and short-term profit, The company ultimately strayed away from their ultimate goal of customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction and a healthy sales environment would have led to greater long-term profits. And an example of this is that Wells Fargo, in this case, had to pay nearly $3 billion in settlements and consent orders, basically showing directly that they did not care about their long-term profits. And the total amount lost from the scandal is actually much larger due to the lost profits from the damages to the company image and just the overall company trust with consumers. We'll move along now to conclusions and recommendations. So our recommendation for Wells Fargo moving past this and really just clearing up their company and getting profits back on track would be to not tie the incentives directly to opening accounts and to loosen the sales environment, to not have employees forced to commit fraud to keep their jobs. One way this could be restructured is to possibly tie incentives to customer satisfaction. With more satisfied customers, they're more likely to come back to Wells Fargo and open more accounts on their own without them having to defraud them and open them without their consent. And this will overall just rebuild the trust of the consumer and help Wells Fargo grow after this case, because they need to overall just have a larger view of the customer and customer satisfaction. Moving forward now to the current status of the case.
Okay, so currently there hasn't been any new information released about the scandal since about 2019. And what Wells Fargo is trying to do right now is just fix all their mistakes, pay back all the money they've stolen from customers and all the charges that customers have incurred because of their scandal. So, and during like February of 2020, almost a little over a year ago, the Wells Fargo paid $3 billion to settle on the scandal, $500 million of which was to settle a civil payment with the SEC. Wells Fargo continues to incur costs, however, because they're trying to pay back all their customers and refund them all the money that they've lost. And they incurred about another $321 million in the last quarter of 2020, which has now pushed their remediation cost totals to about $2.2 billion. The executives who were at power during the scandal also continue to get fined by different financial institutions. And Wells Fargo is no longer the largest bank in the United States. Since their scandal, JP Morgan and Bank of America have taken over that position. Wells Fargo has also lost over 44% of their market value in 2020. In this graph, you can kind of see how their stock price is fluctuating all over the place, and they're still trying to gain that trust back with their shareholders and their customers to make that back. Their net interest income, which is one of the biggest ways they make money as a bank, has also dropped by 17% because they're not able to lend as many loans out anymore to individuals and to businesses alike. And the quarter-over-quarter decline in market share has equated up to 26% now in 2020. They have also had to close about 329 branches in 2020 and plan on closing 250 more this year to make up for all their lost profits. They've also let go about 6,400 of their employees because of the scandal. So they are trying hard to pay everything off and win back customers and shareholders at the same time. And their new logo says, or their new slogan says that they're trying to win back consumer trust with new campaigns. But those new campaigns are still kind of they're not transparent to the public. We don't really know what they're doing or what they plan on doing, but they definitely have a lot of goals, which they need to because they have a lot of money to pay off. But that is all. Thank you.
I had a question, Tanisha. I had a couple of questions. This is an excellent case. And I think that what it really shows more than anything, when I had students do this case 5 years ago, right? Then now from 2016, look what they've done. They've repeatedly, and I think whichever one of you pointed out that I think it was Sean, kept promoting from within, they were supporting the same fraudulent corporate culture. Did any of them, I don't think Stumpf did any of them, as far as you know, go to jail?
I don't think so. I think they were all mostly just fined for their fraud.
Mm-hmm. And that's very interesting in and of itself, right? Because there was clear-cut intent and criminal fraud. And so, but of course, government sometimes hesitates when it's something part of our financial infrastructure, like one of our 3 largest banks, to do more than just fine. But maybe this was one of the examples where they should have done more than just fine. And Carrie, at least, should have experienced some prison time. What was the other thing I wanted to say? Oh, do any of you have or want accounts at Wells Fargo?
No.
I don't trust them. I still don't trust them.
My truck, like I financed it through Wells Fargo. I didn't know anything about this though.
Well, of course, isn't it always interesting how these are public scandals, but we don't know? Like we were all driving with Takata defective airbags.
Yeah.
But we don't know. And that's why if we can't trust business, we're consumers in so many different ways. We can be harmed potentially in so many different ways. And that's why they need to be holding businesses to this higher standard. As far as you know, though, you didn't get auto insurance fees and other fees, Nicholas, that you didn't plan on.
Yeah, everything I've seen has been pretty standard, so that's good.
But can you imagine getting your bank statement and they've added on to the total that you borrowed?
And if I would have known this, I would have not had them finance my truck.
Well, we had money in Wells Fargo too, so don't feel badly. Until I found out about this, we had some money in Wells Fargo. So yeah, I mean, I think it should take them a long time to win back consumer trust. And I agree with Tanisha that, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean, oh, we won't commit crimes anymore?
Yeah.
How reassuring is that?
There was the CNN article about how they claimed that they would make back like $8 billion with and it just said with various campaigns that they haven't disposed, they haven't told anybody about. And I was like, that's kind of counterproductive if you're trying to win back trust and you don't give any information to consumers.
That's right. And I will also tell you there's a subtext here. And I don't know if you saw that in any of these articles, but they specifically targeted Hispanic lenders for trucks and vehicles. And I mean, people that they felt were less sophisticated in terms of understanding fees and processes and things like that. And so, that once again gets into the kinds of discriminatory practices that we're looking at currently as a society. How do we protect those that are poorer and less educated from being ripped off?
I was watching, there was a documentary on it on Netflix, and one of the whistleblowers, she was a female who worked up in Northern California in a farming area, and her boss legit went up to her and told her to go to the Hispanic workers on the corner, get them to come in. But he also told her to try to look sexy. He told her to go get them to come in and open up a bunch of accounts because just
that gives me the chills.
It's terrible.
Oh my gosh.
And also, I think because they were cross-selling a lot, which basically they would sell them so many products that it would be hard for consumers to get out of that Wells Fargo web, which I think would also help while targeting minorities and people who like know less about fees and things like that, because it's like, okay, you're in for one thing, but you're also in for 10 other things. And it's kind of hard to see where these fees are coming from and like kind of track them, which I think is also why they were able to continue this on for so long without consumers like catching on in masses, because there were so many different products that consumers were buying from Wells Fargo.
Well, and another thing from a societal perspective, from a systemic perspective that we might want to think about, should a bank be able to charge for auto insurance? Should they be able to, no. The auto insurance perhaps should be a completely separate product from a completely separate entity that's regulated by government. And how did this happen that they could sell things like that? What's gone wrong in our regulatory system of banking that's allowing this?
Yeah, because it becomes overwhelming if you have your mortgage, your car loan, your bank accounts, your credit cards, everything through Wells Fargo. You're like,
right.
I guess I'm just here to stay, because like that's a lot of paperwork to like leave Wells Fargo to go to somewhere else.
I found that with Bank of America, who's engaged. There was another whole scandal with them about 8 years ago. And we had so many things through Bank of America to try and go ahead and make that change. But I should look Bank of America up. We should look up our institutions periodically, you guys, and see what kinds of trouble they're getting in.
Yeah. I think it says a lot that even though that Wells Fargo isn't the biggest bank anymore, it still has like 1.77 trillion like
that's a powerful
can't leave,
economic force in an economy. And you can see that that's why they could not. And Eduardo Benitez says, that's why I use a credit union over a bank. Think about that, right? Credit unions, and they are also federally insured, right? One of the things about banks.
Yeah, I use a credit union.
You use a credit union too? Yeah, we're thinking of making a change to a credit union. And for your own protection and your family's protection, if they, ask you, you may want to make that suggestion.
You always want to make sure you have less than, I think, $250,000 in a bank account, because
Right.
or else it won't be insured.
Right. And so if the bank failed or the credit union failed, the federal government would not pay you back your deposit over $250,000. That's correct. Very good. You guys are so savvy. All right. Well, I'm very proud of that. I want to take down Wells Fargo, and we'll now move on to group 7. Okay. And group 7 is college admissions.
All right. Are we good to start? Okay. Hello, class. We'll be covering the college admission scandals today. My name is Denny. Today we have Devin Ng, Esmeralda Vasquez, Michael Jutanich, and Sarah Yackling. For the preview, I'll be covering the facts of the college admission scandals. Esmeralda will be covering the stakeholders. Sarah will be covering the system, corporate, and individual issues. Mike will be covering the cost, benefit, and fundamental human rights model. And Devin will be covering the conclusion and collaboration. And I'll be closing with the legal results and the current status. Facts about the college admission scandals. Operation Varsity Blues, an investigation by the FBI. Followed William Singer examining how elite universities such as Georgetown, Stanford, UCLA, USC, etc., took bribes through sports scholarships to undeserving students. The parents paid a large sum of money that was conceived as charity donations. The bribes were sent out to exam administrators, coaches, school faculty by Singer. And also Mark Riddle was a test taker for some of the students. So I would say for the ACTs and SATs as well. This scandal has been going on from 2011 to 2018. And in 2019, the FBI made the charges public. Next, I'll have Esmeralda be covering the stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Danny. Okay, so I'm going to move on with the stakeholders. There are multiple stakeholders in the college admission scandal. I'm going to name quite a couple. William Singer would be considered the mastermind of the scandal. He would be the one that got the ball rolling with the slide door scandal, and he did also create the Key Foundation, where he helped bribe college admission people, and he also did get the students replaced with other people while taking the test. Another stakeholder would be Gordon Ernest. He is a head men and women's tennis coach at Georgetown University. He did resign and he tried to not plead guilty in 2019. However, he was hit with new charges and including conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud. The stakeholders that were affected most in the scandal, I would say, would be the passed over qualified students and the educational community overall. Due to the action of the people who were charged in the case, the students who did work hard and had merit were rejected from their dream schools. The students who were affected most were affected most because it wasn't a level playing field when they were applying to universities. The wealthy parents decided to get help from William to get admitted to the schools. And the last stakeholders would be the universities themselves. They did have lawsuits filed against them because of the whole scandal. And they were also playing their parts in 2011. And next we're gonna have Sarah take over. Thank you.
Thanks, Esmeralda. Next, I'll be discussing the 3 issues present in the college admission scandal. The first systematic issue would be that there was a flaw in admissions for colleges involved. Most of the schools involved were considered to be elite and allowed money to play a factor in students' admissions. On the other hand, there had been an issue with faculty. That they were mostly coaches that continued to accept business through William Singer and donations through money, or donations from their parents. Most of the spots on the teams were described as smaller and low-key to the public, which made it easier for students to get on these teams. The first corporate issue is that these colleges prioritized wealthy families rather than honest applicants. Most families willing to pay thousands of dollars for these colleges thought that the colleges had a prestige image and reconstructed the sole purpose of education. For example, Lori Laughlin paid up to $500,000 for both of her daughters to get into USC and continued to donate money. Lastly, individual issues. William Singer created a side door for wealthy parents to secure spots at desirable colleges. He was able to do this because of his former knowledge with being a high school basketball coach and connecting with college scouts. Also, the parents and coaches that were found guilty had to pay fines or serve jail time. But most people saw this as a slap in the wrist for these crimes. Next, Michael would be talking about the cost-benefit model.
Thank you, Sarah. So we're going to go over the cost and benefits model. So let's go over the benefits first. The first benefit of the admission scandal was that William Singer and various faculty members were able to make money selling admissions to these colleges. And the next benefit is that the parents were able to get their children into good schools without their children really having to earn it. Another benefit came to the students whose parents were able to get them in with money rather than merit. And the children who are involved will likely be set up to have a very successful life due to graduating from some of the top universities in the world. And as you can see, there's really no benefit for anyone who wasn't involved in the scandal. So now we're going to go over the cost of the situation. So one cost of the situation is that William Singer and many of the parents and staff involved were sent to prison for their actions. William Singer hasn't had a trial yet, but he faces up to 65 years in prison. And the parents and staff involved were given various lengths of prison sentences. Another cost is that the schools and people involved now have to be associated with the scandal, and that association has tarnished the reputation of all parties involved. And the final cost of the situation is that the students who deserve to be admitted based on good grades were not selected because they had their place taken by someone with more influence. Now we're going to go over the universality. I have a hard time saying that word. So that's basically asking the question, would I recommend all parents and staff act in this way? And obviously no, because if everyone behaved like this, then no students would get into college based on merit. Rather, the admissions would just go to the highest bidder. And it would also result in the wealthiest people in society having exclusive access to the best education, while the less wealthy people would not have that access. All right, now we're going to cover the reversibility of the case. And that's asking the question, if the rules were to be reversed, would it still be okay? And no, because the parents of the children involved would be upset if their children were not admitted because someone else bought their way in. And vice versa, the staff who were paid off would be upset to see other staff making money off unethical conduct. And let's take a look at the right that was violated in the scandal. So the right that was violated in this case was the right to equal opportunity. All students did not have an equal opportunity of being admitted due to bribes. And students who had better grades and qualifications for admission were passed up, even though they would have likely been chosen over the other students who were involved in the scandal. There's no money involved. So now I'm going to pass it on to Devin, and he's going to cover the conclusion and collaboration of the case.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to start with the conclusion portion first. The universities mentioned earlier, UCLA, USD, Georgetown, they had their integrity compromised. A lot of families with students were angered by how unfair the admissions branch had let these students in, since it wasn't really based on their grades or skills, but more about how much money their parents had to donate. And obviously, as large as a scandal this was, it was bound to have a lot of major consequences. Singer, he had gone so far to create a organization to help less fortunate students get into universities. But it was really just a cover-up to launder his bribe money so that it would be tax-free, which also becomes an issue with the IRS. Some of the most notable parents, Lori Loughlin and her husband, Mosimo Giannulli, had received 2 and 5 months of prison, and they also received $150,000 in fines, and her husband receiving $250,000 in fines. And another notable parent, Douglas Hodge, he was a former CEO of PIMCO, had received 9 months of prison and $750,000 in fines because he tried to bribe his son and 2 daughters into USC. And now with the collaborative solutions. Since the scandal, the universities have focused more of their attention into the admissions and development process. Some universities have already begun to step up their admissions process, like Yale now requiring their athletic directors to review coach proposed recruits so that they ensure the students qualify for college level athletics. And Georgetown now conducts audits on their sports programs to make sure the recruiters are valid. A few solutions that could have prevented the situation would be to strengthen or enforce staff integrity for fair student education. Another one would be where every and all members of staff should have told the upper chairman to as soon as they heard about it, so that it wouldn't be secretly spread around anymore. And another method which could have been easily set up is to have an anonymous hotline for the staff so to report any issues whilst being discreet and safe. I will now let Denny finish with the legal results and current status.
Thank you, Devin, for the great conclusion and collaboration. For the legal results and current status, we see that the university faculty, 11 were charged, fired, arrested, and fined. Rudolph Meredith, Yale Bulldogs, the women's soccer coach, he was caught by the FBI and then led to Singer. I'm still waiting to hear the charges for him. John Vonmer from Stanford, a sailing coach, $10,000 in fine. I think he served a little time in jail and some house arrest as well. He was the least punished because all of his donations, all the money went to the organization rather than taking money for himself. George Sakoto, UCLA men's soccer head coach, serves 8 months in prison and some fines and jail time as well. While the parents were charged, arrested, and fined, mentioned earlier, we have Lori Loughlin, Mosimo Giannulli, parents of Olivia and Isabella. Olivia had a lot of controversy behind her based off her YouTube. Mark Riddle was fired from Image Academy and pled guilty. Still waited to hear the punishment for him. And William Rick Singer, the mastermind behind the whole operation, obviously pled guilty. We're still waiting to hear charges from the government for him because currently he's working with the FBI with the prosecutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think for all of us in education, this is particularly dispiriting. And I agree with Michael's comment about sustaining white privilege and, you know, misuse of the idea of merit for students. I mean, if you're working so hard as you've all worked, and there's somebody that's going to beat you out in admissions just because their parents have some money, you know, what a corrupt system that is. What does that say about the next generation? And I'll tell you something that I don't necessarily believe in. That's called legacy. Have you guys heard legacy? So let's say your parent went to Princeton. Well, you get first shot, your legacy. That doesn't mean you've necessarily earned your way in. You may have, or you may not have. USC has legacy too, of course. And of course, why? And that's when we get into perverse incentives again. Well, because USC needs to raise money. It needs to get donations, right? And that's where the ultimate perverse incentive occurs and leads to behavior where, you know, perhaps unethical, and as we've seen here, very unlegal things are done in order to get donations. And then the person that got the donation, you know, can put it on, you know, their professional development or whatever, and they get, you know, a big commission or what have you. So that whole underlying system of sort of white privilege, legacy, and, you know, pursuing donations, I think also sets this potential dynamic up. And I really, really hate it because it's not fair to our students overall in society. But so excellent job, everybody. I couldn't be more thrilled and I learned a lot. And so I thank you very much. All right, I'm going to try and share screen with you here now and go over our, let's see, inbox, show all windows. See, some things are still here that I haven't gotten to. What was final exam review? All right, so as I mentioned, we are going to start this. This is 2 pages. I've been working on it and modifying it. I may modify it one more time and then repost it. And it talks about, so what I do, you know, when I write the exam, I think I've mentioned, I go right back to our roadmap, the syllabus. And from this roadmap, the syllabus, I've created materials for you. I have posted articles. I have posted PowerPoint slides. I will make sure, Denny, did you forward me the PowerPoint slides from the college admissions? Okay.
Yeah, I just sent it already before class, or during class, I meant.
I'll make sure that those get up for you too on Beachboard, because you are responsible for those cases too. The students went to a lot of effort to prepare and research these cases, and they all fall within the areas. So you look at the syllabus as your roadmap. What are the areas, the subtexts of unethical conduct that we're looking at? And one, of course, has been the ethics of financial reporting. And this is an important one, right? And I think it was maybe even Michael or one of you did actually even talk about the SEC and the Securities and Exchange Act. But remember this underlying, because I'm going to ask you, you know, we have regulation in financial reporting. Why? Well, because there's tremendous possibility of fraud. And with fraud, there's tremendous possibility of harm. Look what we just saw in Wells Fargo. That could be your parents. That could be your friends, right? So we demand legally from this underlying unethical possibility that truthful, accurate financial reporting disclosure, right? And that's supposed to lead to a level playing field and even bargaining power. That's between shareholders and companies who, of course, must publish their financial statements. Oh, you know what I forgot? What can I add on here? You know what was the other one case? Health stuff, right? Remember Health South and Aaron Bean? He was the CFO that created those false financial statements. So we have 3 examples here of various types of financial fraud cases that we discussed. Wirecard, which you just saw, right, in Germany, and what they were doing and how they ultimately, once again, short-term versus long-term. In the long term, they went bankrupt. And I mean, you know, the guys that have walked away with the commissions, I guess they just don't care about the longevity of their company. They walk away with, you know, their stock options and sell them out before the company goes bankrupt. And, you know, how do we change that incentive that they have to be to try and benefit themselves, to be selfish, to be greedy? All right, so, and then we saw with Wells Fargo that great, 8 is great, right? Taking advantage of the consumer, charging them fees, not accurately disclosing. So we're always looking at accurate disclosure, and lack of truthful, accurate disclosure can lead to both civil and criminal penalties. You have Wirecard also, because it's an example for you that this goes on not just with United States companies, of course, but throughout the world. So make sure if you missed the Wirecard PowerPoint presentation of your colleagues the other day, that you look at that carefully. All right, and the Wells Fargo we just did, and Health South was a financial statement misrepresentation case. So we have some examples. We have a technology company over here that was engaging in financial frauds. We have a bank, and we have a corporation. All right, if you look next, we went into sexual harassment as our next area. And I put these in bold for you so that you can clearly, you know, see what area are we in. And the PowerPoint slides say something about the ethics of equal opportunity. We talk about, in fact, I should add, see how going over this with you helps me, and racial discrimination. Because it's both. Okay. So we see we started with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the idea that, right, people were being discriminated against so badly that it might even be an ad and it would say, no minorities apply. I mean, literally in the newspaper back in those days, no minorities apply, meaning only white people apply. Like, how horrifying is that to us at this stage in our history, to believe that anyone would even think on any level of morality or ethics that that would be okay. So Congress stepped in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and in addition to racial, and look back at my slides that I created for you also in this area. So everything you need is on Beachboard, but you cannot just memorize this final exam review sheet and do well on the exam. You will not do well on the exam. You have to go back and read and understand all of the PowerPoint in these areas. Okay, all right. We saw in terms of sexual harassment, remember the Hooters case? We saw quid pro quo, where actually, right, Bill Hooters said, you keep me happy, baby. And look at the guy, who pointed out, was it Nicholas? Can you imagine the boss sending her out dressed in a sexy way to bring in the men and to take advantage of them by opening up accounts and so forth? So, you know, she was being clearly sexually harassed in her work environment, in addition to the financial fraud of the situation, right? And we also talked about, I better put up that case, Mitsubishi, which is the plant where they were demanding sexual favors in order to keep their jobs. We saw that it's not just any dirty joke. A person's not, first of all, these are usually non-criminal cases. Remember that. If there is a sexual assault, then it leaves the law of sexual harassment and goes to criminal sexual assault. But most sexual harassment is handled under civil litigation under the EEOC. All right. So it's not just any dirty joke. What else can it be? Well, what we call severe. These words are very important. You need to know severe and pervasive, right? Severe might be something like touching someone without permission, especially the touch bill Hooters gave behind the bar. What other case did we just talk about? McDonald's. Now notice something similar about Hooters and McDonald's, right? When you have kitchens and close quarters back there with everybody, supervisors, employees, the waiters, everyone, they're in very close proximity to each other. So there's greater access just by that environment. So it's not surprising that we see two restaurants, a bar kind of restaurant and a restaurant where individuals are being inappropriately touched, which would definitely be a severe harassment. If it's not severe, the court resolving the issue would look to see, is it pervasive? Does it occur over and over again, right? We had the staring case. Remember the staring case? The guy asked her out. She said no. She would be on the factory assembly line doing her function. He was on the forklift making deliveries of parts to the assembly line, and he would stop his forklift and just stare at her like this and say nothing. She felt intimidated by that. And I think that the average reasonable person would feel intimidated by that. And so that's why that case is up also. So make sure you look up all the cases. The staring case. In fact, I'll take the staring case and I'll put it down here with these cases. In regards to what I had you students do, we did a different twist on sexual harassment. We did it in a not-for-profit where there were leaders of young men. And we saw that once again, access is part of, when we're trying to solve these problems as a society, right? One of the things we saw is that scout leaders would be alone with young boys and in showers and sleeping bags and other circumstances which are completely inappropriate and allow for predatory behavior. And so their policy now that they can't be alone, right, in a shower or a sleeping bag with a young Boy Scout. There have to be at least two leaders there. So we've seen once again, and that's why these cases are important to you, what cases you need to be responsible for. Go back and look at what the point of them was. We did do one racial discrimination case on BMW. You may remember that what it was that they were firing their Black workers that had any kind of a criminal charge on their record. Most of them were for nonviolent crimes, drug crimes. And it had a discriminatory impact because many more Black employees were let go than other races. So, okay, so remember that case too. And I posted an article. So everyone is clear, right? When you go on Beach Board, because you need to be on Beach Board at good length to study, the two places where you're going to find everything you need are under PowerPoints, but not every PowerPoint, because we're not going back to the beginning of the class. Just the ones on here, just the ones on your syllabus for the second half of the class. Okay, what else? And then the second place to go is cases and handouts, cases and handouts. And that's where the articles are about all of these things. Once again, there are articles like the dairy case and things like that, but that was from the first half of the class. You're not responsible for that, okay? So are there any questions on the first two topic areas? Financial, oh, and I know what we need to add. Hang on. Now, I'm not going to pull questions, remote questions that I haven't told you about from the textbook, but I do want you to know that. So for example, if you want to write down, we had a whole section on financial fraud, right? And so, I had you read that section on financial fraud. And that's where the Aaron Bean case is. So, you know, you do need to go back and look at those pages. So I will modify this for the financial fraud pages, for the sexual harassment pages, not all of them, but you definitely need to know some of them. And now for the ethics in the marketplace, which is chapter 6. So behind each of these, I'll put the chapter and the pages. But it's to enhance. This is not meant to be a tricky case exam. This is meant to be an exam where you have all the materials that you need. And I'd never ask a question that we haven't discussed some aspect of this in class. Remind me to come back with the fraud triangle. Okay. Fraud triangle. I'm adding that in here too as I modify fraud triangle. Okay, there we go. All right. So here, because we're always looking at what's the underlying ethics reason that caused government to step in and regulate. There was some problem. There was unethical conduct. And here it, right, had to do with lack of competition. Sellers in the marketplace of services or products or anything, they are supposed to be competing based on price and merit. Who does that benefit? Us, the consumer, right? This is very important to us. Was Wells Fargo competing on price and merit with their customers? No. In fact, they were doing the opposite, right, of merit. They were actually financially harming their own customers. So when government stepped in and decided to regulate here, what they made illegal and criminal was anti-competitive conduct. It violates the underlying ethics of fairness and equal opportunity to get a good product at the most reasonable cost. And it's sometimes white collar crime, criminal behavior. We talked about the Sherman Act. This is another statute that you need to know, just like you know, and I have the slides on it when you look in your competition. I think they're called the competition slides. This is a sheer memorization. Section 1, I told you what I did to memorize it. Section 1's the 3 C's. And the 3 C's are all collaborations. It takes at least two companies to violate Section 1. Section 2 takes 1 company. All right, so what is the prime example we discussed of illegal collaborations? There are other types. I kept the focus pretty much in terms of the 3 C's on price fixing, where sellers that are competing against each other have a secret to agree on price rather than competing on the issue of price. And I think someone mentioned, and I know I mentioned to you, like when gasoline prices have recently gone up, right? And there's 2 gas stations within a block of each other, and this one goes up to $4 and something, and then this one goes up to $4 and something. And we're thinking, what? You know, I want to go to the station that has a less expensive price. And then the issue is, are they doing it so that they're not competing on price, or are they doing it because of their own costs? Obviously, they're not going to say they're doing it in an anti-competitive way. They're going to say they're doing it because their own costs have gone up. So, you know, these are complex cases, especially when you're looking at the international big ones. What we talked about in terms of, oh, I know it. We talked about the tuna case. I don't know if I have this here. And we need, how could I forget Bridgestone, which you guys did a great job on. Okay. See, going over this with you. Now stop me at any time. Does anyone have any questions so far? This is not meant to be a soliloquy, or whatever the word is. No? Okay, we'll continue. Okay, so there's the big tuna case and there's the Bridgestone case. Now, we also talked about Section 2 of the Sherman Act that has to do with monopolization. The idea is, if you have a monopoly, oh, cute dog, Denny.
Sorry, she was crying, so I was trying to comfort her.
Yeah, you're a nice guy. So attempts to misuse your monopoly, to criminally and illegally misuse your monopoly, is what the statute is attempting to prevent, right? So they shall be guilty of a felony. So it is criminal conduct, as is price fixing. Our prime example that we talked about here was Google in the European Union, which you guys did a great job on. And once again, to make this international in your minds, right? Some of you may want to think you want to go to work for a company that does business internationally. And so then you're paying attention to what's happening on the international business, which I would encourage you to do as a business person. Look at the Wall Street Journal and look at the international business issues too. Now, I will say that, let's see here. Oh, here's Bridgestone. Oh yeah, Google and Bumblebee. Oh, okay, they're here too. Okay, good. I thought we'll just leave them in there twice. One of the things before we go to intellectual property that I want to tell you about is this idea of make sure you write this down, because I will 100% ask you a question or more, up to 5, on this issue. Because to me, this is the underlying ethical dilemma that your generation will face the most. What happens when a company is too big to fail? Does that mean then it engages in criminal wrongdoing? It can do that. And just pay fines, huge fines, billions. We look at these cases, 500 million to the SEC, 2 billion to the remediation of the customers harmed, and on and on. And they continue. They pay. You saw with Wells Fargo, they paid huge fines in like 2015 or something, and then they just continued on in the same wrongful conduct. Google has paid, you go back to the PowerPoint slides of the student, and however much, if any of you remember, billions. And now they're being looked at in the United States. But do we just have a lawless international business system where huge firms dominate? They can gouge the consumer. They can be fraudulent to the consumer, not disclose information, and just pay fines? What kind of a world is that? What kind of a business world is that? We can't even trust our own banks, right? We can't trust universities to make decisions based on merit. So that too big to fail idea, and how do we control it? Now, one of my primary, to add the last thought about this, ideas about how to control it is we really, really need to implement those criminal penalties against the individuals and against the individuals at the top. I think John Stumpf at Wells Fargo should definitely have been criminally prosecuted, and so should have his assistant. Maybe we would see less terrible conduct from the top. And then, the other issue, and you guys mentioned it in Wells Fargo, what about the employees that get dragged into this fraudulent misconduct? Because they're pressured, because they're trying to hold on to their job. Ignorance of the law is no excuse, so they could be prosecuted for what they do. But they've also tarnished their reputation. Do you think another bank's going to want to hire them, knowing they engaged in fraudulent selling of, accounts? What happens to their futures? So anyway, that's my little spiel on an overall corrupt international business environment, and how do we deal with this too big to fail? Okay, so let's see. We then went into the area of intellectual property, which is always fun for me. Now, once again, what's the underlying ethical reason? Why did government even step in and regulate about who owns creative and scientific property. Well, we're trying to create an environment of innovation, right? But also make things available to the human race, like medicine and technology. So, right? So government gives the creator of intellectual property a temporary monopoly on the revenue. That means they get all the money from the patent or from the copyright or trademark for a period of time, if the intellectual property is unique and tangible, not just an idea. Okay. So government is always balancing. So, I should add the two worlds. And what are the two worlds? Does anyone remember the two worlds? Everything in intellectual property is in one of two worlds, right?
Public domain.
Okay, private domain.
Right. So it's either covered, right, by the owner, they get the revenue, or other people can use that same concept because it's in the public domain. I find it interesting as I'm seeing more and more music from my younger days being used in commercials that, right, they're falling into the public domain. All right, so we divided up intellectual property into 3 areas. You need to know all the statutes involved.